Hello and welcome to another motorcycling video. I'm on the road again, and if you'll recall, at the end of the last video I was just going through some of the cuttings or going under the overpasses that were part of the bypass around the city or town village of Perth. So I'm still on that road and heading into the little township of Perth, and thinking of things that I could talk about. At the moment I'm just going to be following this car in front of me and the bus in front of me, and you'll notice as this bus slows down here and then takes off again, a large or a plume of black smoke that's emitted from its exhaust. Now I'm going to assume that the bus is a diesel operated vehicle, and got me thinking about diesel vehicles, and in particular I noticed the other day that Toyota were going to be in some trouble with having to make refunds to owners of vehicles that were diesel vehicles because of some problem with the particulate filter in the engine. Now I'll start this discussion a bit by saying I'm not a mechanic, I'm not an engineer, I don't own a diesel vehicle, but I do know that people buy diesels because although the fuel is more expensive, it goes further. In other words, you go more kilometres out of your tank of diesel than you do out of your tank of petrol. But in the olden days, back in the day, diesels were mostly driven by people who did long trips like buses and trucks and so on, and so the engine got to its prime operating temperature quickly, and the particulate filter managed to do its job. Nowadays, many people buy a diesel and drive it around town. They don't necessarily get the fuel economy they expect, but on top of that, because the engine doesn't operate at the temperatures that it's supposed to operate, the particulate filter doesn't do the job that it's supposed to do. Now, at one stage, when that was a problem, you would take your car to the mechanic, and they would take your car out on the road and get it up to 110 kilometres an hour and run it for a little while, and the blockages in the filter would be blown out. That's not the case any longer, and the filters have got to be replaced, and that's an expensive process. So that's in part because of more people driving diesels, and diesels having to work hard to meet fuel emissions and so on. So that was just one thing that occurred to me while I was watching the bus go. I've just going through now the little township of Perth, and we've gone through the CBD such as it is, which is the main street, and that part of it was the shopping precinct. This is more of the residential part of the village, and this would be the part where the buses and trucks in particular that were going to Hobart would have come through the town and made life pretty unpleasant for the people who lived in Perth. Now you can see here on the left hand side a whole bunch of new houses, and I mentioned in the last video how there'd been an explosion in house building in Perth now because of the bypass, and because cars who don't need to go into Perth don't go into Perth any longer, because trucks that don't need to go into Perth don't go into Perth, they go around. It's become a more livable place. The people who shop there and live there have much less noise. They certainly have less damage to their roads because of trucks and so on, and I'm sure it's a much more pleasant place to live. Now, the city that I live in New South Wales, Goulburn, it's right on the Hume Highway, and it was bypassed, I think, something like 15 years ago. Before that, all the trucks going to Melbourne, all the traffic going to Melbourne from Sydney used to go through our town or through our city. And there were a lot of advantages to that, because people who were going to the ski fields, or people who were going to Canberra, people who were going anywhere south of Goulburn would stop in Goulburn and get coffee or fuel and have a feed or something like that, and that through traffic was good for the economy. But there were also lots of trucks who went through our main street, and you couldn't have a conversation in the main street with other people, and this main street was full of the smell of diesel trucks and the noise of diesel trucks. And when the bypass was opened, not only did those trucks and buses that didn't need to come into Goulburn not come into Goulburn any longer, but of course much of the ski traffic that didn't need to come into Goulburn stopped coming into Goulburn as well. There's a number of service centres just north of Goulburn. The closest one would be at Marulan, which is about 30 k's from Goulburn. So we'd stop there, get fuel, get a feed, get some coffee, and then you'd keep going. And so for a while, the city of Goulburn suffered a severe downturn in its economic activity, and the population declined quite significantly. And that wasn't necessarily only the case because of the opening of the bypass, because at the same time, wool sales that used to be conducted in regional centres like Goulburn were all centralised in one location in Sydney. So all of the people who came to buy wool from, and including people from overseas, and brought their wives with them and spent a whole week at the wool auctions, stopped coming. And at the same time, the New South Wales government went into a deliberate plan to downsize rail, and in particular freight rail. And Goulburn was a large rail centre. So between those three things, economic activity in Goulburn suffered a downturn. Now, I'm not suggesting that's exactly what's going to happen in Perth, and it may not, because obviously they don't have a railway line and they don't have wool sales. But some of the through traffic that might have stopped there for coffee or fuel or whatever might not do so now. I know, for example, that when I went on the Black Dog one-day ride in 2020, I went through Perth, and quite a big bunch of motorcyclists all met at the roadhouse there, made sure they all had full tanks of petrol, and continued from there. I think it was about 2018 that I went on the Christmas toy ride, and we went through Perth, and again a whole bunch of motorcyclists met up at the roadhouse there and fueled up and got coffee and whatever. So some of those things will affect the township for a little while, but eventually it will pick up, because, as I say, there are more houses being built there, and more people will be shopping in the place there, sending their children to the school there, and so economic activity will pick up. So I'm coming out the other side of Perth now, and I'm up on the road going towards the Devon Hills turnoff. In fact, I think I may have just passed the Devon Hills turnoff. Yes, and I'm seeing here signs indicating the turnoff to the airport and Evandale. Evandale's a beautiful historic village just past, a couple of k's past Launceston Airport. A lovely place to visit, lots of interesting historical buildings, and just a beautiful little village to walk around, nice and quiet. And as I say, this is the turn off to it here. Continuing ahead, just staying on the main road here, will take me back towards the city of Launceston. As you can see, this is a part of the road where it's a dual carriageway, 2 lanes in either direction, and I talk about that in relation to the Bass Highway. It's a plan for the state government has to make the Midland Highway, which is what this highway is. The road from Launceston to Hobart is called the Midland Highway, and the state government has a plan to make it a dual carriageway all the way. I think they started talking about this in about 2017, 2018, and said that it would be a 10-year plan. Now, I haven't been down the highway anywhere for a while, so I'm not sure where they're up to with that plan, but I know that there are places where it is a single lane in each way, and as you go through St Peter's Pass down past Ross, the highway is quite narrow, so there is work to be done. And when you consider that this is part of the main arterial route from the capital to the second biggest city, and then on to Devonport, where the freight comes into the island, having a dual carriageway would be an ideal thing. Now, of course, doing that has its pluses and its minuses. When you decide you're going to widen the road 2 lanes in both directions, obviously you've got to clear trees and things like that, and people get very sensitive about that, and rightly so. The government would argue, well, for every tree we clear, we're going to plant another one, and that may be the case. It may be that, however, that those trees that they plant, and think of the trees that have been cleared that could have been there for 100 years doing their job, soaking up carbon and so on, and those trees that they plant will do the same job, but it will take them 100 years to grow back to the size of the trees that have been cleared. I'm mentioning this because in the previous video, when I was on the Illawarra Road, I came across a news item recently where, again, the Department of State Growth, I think it's called, was planning to widen parts of the Illawarra Road, because motorists, trucks in particular, do what I did, and that is go off the Bass Highway, go down the Illawarra Road, and then meet up on the Perth bypass and continue their journey to Hobart that way. it's claimed that doing that saves them something like 7 minutes on their trip, and therefore gets the freight faster, saves money, increases productivity. There's all sorts of claims about that. Now, the point about that is that along that road somewhere there is a hedge along the side of the road that is claimed to be 200 years old. And the government is saying, well, if we widen the road, we're going to widen it there and we're going to have to dig up that hedge. And of course, the people who live in that area are most reluctant for that to happen. And although the government would say, well, we will plant more trees, you can't plant and replace a 200-year-old hedge. And the hedge itself it's a plant, but it has an intrinsic value, and it's part of the heritage values of the heritage of the state. So we're on the Midland Highway heading back towards Launceston, a dual carriageway here. As you can see, the road is nice and wide. The tree line is back from the road a little bit, which I always think is a good thing. It gives you that sense of openness. And you'll notice when you're driving on country roads where the roads are a little narrow, or where the tree line is closer to the road, that there is that sort of shadowing and dappled light effect that you get on the road sometimes, which, while it's beautiful, does make driving a little bit more hazardous. I've just pulled off the Midland Highway, taken the Kings Meadows link, I think this is officially called. Kings Meadows is a southeastern suburb of Launceston. It has its own shopping centre and schools and all that sort of stuff. And this road links it to the highways. It also, if you follow it all the way through, links Kings Meadows to Launceston's CBD. There's also been a bit of housing development along this area here. So coming along this part here is sort of light industrial with some big box industries. There's a Bunnings store just down the road from where we are now. Then there's another business that sells agricultural equipment and a few things like that just on the left-hand side coming up shortly. But on the right-hand side there has been a new housing estate open up, and over the last 5 years that I've been coming up and down this road and looking at the houses, you can see them here on the right-hand side. There have been a lot of houses built here, and there's quite a big estate that's going to be in here. So again, another area that's sort of booming in terms of housing and population growth and so on. I think that would probably be part of St Leonard's, but I'm not 100% certain. So continuing down this road here, which again I think is still referred to as the Kings Meadows link. You can see what I mean about here, the tree line being a bit closer to the main road, to the road. And although the road is well marked with the line down the middle and there's boundary lines and there's a guardrail along the side here, it's in pretty good condition. I don't recall any potholes or jarring bumps from in the suspension of the bike. So it's all in pretty good condition. It's all pretty well maintained. Coming up to a major intersection here where if I were to turn left, I would go down towards the suburb of Kings Meadows. If I turn right, I would go towards Youngtown. And going straight through as I am going to do, I'll be heading up in the general direction of St Leonard's. So you sit at the traffic lights and just wait for your one to go green. Like a watched pot that never boils. And away we go. The Suzuki Bergman has what's referred to as the CVT, or constantly variable transmission, which is essentially a twist and go, almost like an automatic. I don't understand the technicalities of how it works, but it's basically like an automatic in a K. Just twist the throttle and away it goes. You don't have to change gear or anything, so you're pretty quick off the mark here. It does have a manual override system which allows you to select a sixth gear when you're out on the highway and get better fuel economy, and all you do is just flip a button on the left handlebar. There's no clutch, and it's not necessary to close the throttle to do it. You just push the button and it responds. Now, over here on the right-hand side, I think is the lawn cemetery, the Norwood Lawn Cemetery. I think this road is called Penquite Road, but I'm not certain. And I think this suburb on the right-hand side and down this road is called Norwood. And as you can see through the see ahead there, there's still some of that open country and rolling hills and so on that are features of the city of Launceston, that you're never too far from open spaces or the hills and the mountains. A mixture of housing here, some well-established houses and some newer houses. You can see by the design just on the right-hand side back there. I didn't really have any plan for where I was going when I was doing this. I was just riding and saying, well, I'll go here, I'll turn right there, or turn left there, or go straight ahead, or whatever. See where it all takes me. I'd been around most of these roads many times before, but because it's a while since I'd been here, I was forgetting where I was sometimes. Lots of railway crossings here, but those railway crossings are mostly not in use. I'm just coming up to crossing the North Esk River here. This would be the next crossing over from the Hobblers Bridge Road crossing.